Well, this is an Iowa Broadcasting History interview, which we're doing in Clinton, Iowa on August 4th, 1998. We're at the studios of radio station KROS, which is a station that signed on in 1941. So that means you've been at it about 57 years over here in one location or another. And my guests are three persons who have been involved, very deeply involved with this station for all of their lives, practically, I guess it would be fair to say. I'll start with the man in the middle who's holding the microphone. That's Don Schneider, who is the current general manager of the station, and began his experience with it listening to it as a child. To Don's left is Hank Dihlman, who has done everything there is to do around here, including be general manager. And on Don's right is Margaret Gideonsen, who also has done just about everything there is to be done at a hometown radio station. So, Don, let's begin the conversation with you and tell us. Let's kind of bring it up to date. You're located. You're an AM station. You're located in Clinton, and you're here operating still as a full-service radio station.
That's right. The goal or mission of the company that owns the station is to operate a broadcast facility that's consistent with our 55-year tradition of broadcast service to the community. And many of the programs that we have on are still on at the exact same time they've been on for that entire 50-year period.
And that's pretty unusual in today's environment.
Well, the 15-minute local newscasts that we program and some of the other things are just about a dinosaur of the past.
Yes, right. We'll talk some more about that later. Looking back to 1941 then in September, the station went on the air in a downtown location and was associated with the Jacobson family name.
Right. William Jacobson, a U.S. congressman from this city, was the original founder of the Clinton Broadcasting Company.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a studio in the Jacobson building in downtown Clinton. I think that of all the people I've talked to that have worked here over the years, the one thing that they always seem to mention is the studios, which was a typical 1940s radio studio. When you sat in the control room, you were in a raised area. It was glassed in on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
You had the studio B to the left with bleachers and a boom mic and a grand piano for doing live studio programming.
A lot of folks would come down and watch the broadcasts.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Matter of fact, they had the teletype in the lobby, and people would actually come in off the street to watch the news of the day type out on the teletype.
See it on the teletype. Well, your experience, Hank, goes back to that era. Tell us about how you got started. You weren't there quite when they signed on, but came shortly after.
Well, I came on in August of 1942, excuse me, and I had graduated from Cornell College and attended the University of Iowa, particularly to work at WSUI.
Okay.
And then came here in August of 42 as an announcer.
Mm-hmm.
And went on from there. And
you wound up as general manager, which would have been in the 70s time frame?
Yes, I became manager in 1976, and the following year, several of us put together a corporation, and we bought the station, and I served as general manager until I retired in 87.
In 87, okay. And all those years, you were also a sports broadcaster.
Yes, I did it for 40 years. And that's why the voice sounds like it does now.
You used it a lot over those years.
Used it a lot, roughly 5,000 games of one kind or another. And that was something I thoroughly enjoyed.
Well, I'm sure you did. Well, we'll talk some more about that too. Well, Margaret, you came to work here while you were still in high school?
It was just prior to the Christmas season, because I remember the first Christmas rush we had. I was still a kid in high school, and I came in after school in the evening to answer the switchboard. Now, that's a phrase probably no one remembers, but that was my job. And in between time, we picked up a lot of other chores, like putting the logs together for the next day and that sort of thing.
Well, but you also picked up an assignment in what was in that era a pretty common programming format, which was a women's program.
Yeah, we took care of most of the women's area things. We did some at the store interviews for various, one in particular, a furniture store, was great fun. We get to see all the new arrivals. We did little stints at the grocery stores when the grand openings came and all that sort of thing. And we also then ended up really a regular program was Homespun Lane, which was heard every afternoon.
So what were some of the things that you did on Homespun Lane?
Well, we did an awful lot of recipes and household hints and how to cure this, that, and the other thing. And it was great fun.
Yeah.
It really was.
A lot of feedback from the audience
And we
on
did a
that program?
cookbook too.
Yeah.
I can't remember what year.
Yeah.
Followed by a hint book another year.
Did you get a lot of, have a lot of mail from the audience?
Oh yeah, we did. We had phone calls all during the program, and then we
Okay.
would get a lot of.
But you did on-air phone calls on
Yes, we did,
that too?
yeah. That was the fun part, as far as I was concerned, talking to all the people.
Okay. What time of day was your show on?
We started at 1 and went to 2.
And 5 days a week?
Yeah.
An
That's
hour,
right.
an hour
We did an hour.
in the afternoon then, okay.
Well, we started out with a half an hour in the beginning, I think, and then added the other half hour.
Okay. Well, we'll have you chime in from time to time as we reminisce about the history of this station. Take us back then, Don, to some of the early entrepreneurs and also and managers and talent. What was the name of the first manager?
The first manager was Morgan Sexton, who I believe came from WHO in Des Moines. Is that correct, Hank? And Morg, I guess, is the one that we kind of credit with having laid down the foundations or principles that the station still operates on. A heavy commitment to local news, weather, and sports, along with public affairs. He wrote out the first 10 goals and objectives for community growth and development that was the basis of the station's news programming, which is something we picked up again in 1991 and have continued to do every year since then as well. And Morg was, well, I guess Hank would probably be better able to maybe talk a little bit about Morg since he had the opportunity to work with him, and I think Morg actually hired him.
Yeah.
Morgan did hire me, and I think I've always thought was the smartest radio man I've ever met. I guess my ambition was to someday know as much about the business as he had forgotten. I'm not sure I ever accomplished it, but he was quite a guy.
He was a very community-oriented management style, then I take it?
Very, very much so. He knew the community. He was a kind of a manager who would come in and chew you out for something you had done that was not up to his standard. And then 10 minutes later come in and invite you to stop in, we'll have a cup of coffee. I think his way of saying, I want you to do certain things on the air this way, but it's not a personal criticism.
Right.
I like you as a person, but this is your job and you will do it this way.
And he had standards for it.
Yes.
What, as you recall, in that period then, Hank, was sort of the standard program schedule on KROS?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one.
Well, in general, music, of course, was a
Music, and as Don mentioned, it was a full-service station. It always has been heavy on music, local news, local sports, covering community affairs of every type.
all kinds.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your sports broadcasting career. Now, with the exception of a call from Uncle Sam, which took a little chunk out of your life, you started doing play-by-play sports on KROS back in '42, right?
Well, I actually did, I think, 5 ball games before I went into the Army.
Went into the Army.
And when I came back in March of 1946, I took over as sports director. And from then on until, I guess, the end of the '85 basketball season, I did whatever came along.
Probably a game almost every night during the.
Well, there were very many. As I said, in a 40-year period, I did about 5,000 games. So it averaged out to one every 2 or 3 nights anyway.
And you found yourself receiving the Sportscaster of the Year award. When was that?
1981, I was named the Iowa Sportscaster of the Year. I always figured if you hang around long enough, something good will happen.
Well, that put you up there
Yeah.
with Zabel and
Right.
Brooks and
Right.
and some other fairly well-known
Yes.
names. And then a young man came along and picked up the baton that you'd carried for all those
Yes.
games, and so that for all practical purposes, the two of you have done virtually all the play-by-play sports on the station over
Well,
50-some
at least
years.
95% of
Yeah.
it, I would say,
Yeah.
yes.
Hmm. A lot of community identification with that, huh?
Yes, there has been, most of it fortunately good.
Well, they named a press box after you, didn't they?
Yes, at Clinton High, at your gymnasium, they did do that. And I have to say that of all of the things they could have done, nothing would have pleased me more.
Right, yeah. You're still doing play-by-play sports on KROS, Don?
All ready for another fall season coming up starting the first week of September.
Mm-hmm. Full schedule of,
Yes, every Clinton High game, and I think we do a schedule of about 70 basketball games altogether, which involve not only Clinton High, but among a number of the other surrounding schools.
mm-hmm.
We feel that giving publicity to high school athletics is kind of shining a positive light when quite often negatives enter into when you're talking about young people today and
Mm-hmm.
high school athletics and other things that high schools are involved with, band and music. We try to provide publicity to those as well.
Mm-hmm. So when did you decide to sort of hang up your regular hat around here, Margaret?
I think it was 1989, somewhere in there.
So you
I
had,
guess when Social Security
Yeah,
came along.
but you had 40
I really
some.
didn't hang it all the way up.
Yeah.
I keep popping back in here every once in a while.
But so you had about 40 some years of on-air
Off
experience
and on,
then.
yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
What were some of the other duties you kept track of the
Well, we
of the log and
started out, I also had the continuity department for many, many years.
which means writing. You wrote
And we
commercials.
wrote the commercials, and we did the Christmas shows and all those things that came along, or special events that needed opens and closes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
I can remember all those tabs you used to have to put together.
yeah, putting the log together for the following day is a far different process than it is today.
You
with
didn't
our
have a
computers.
computer, huh?
I wouldn't know how to turn one on or off today.
Yeah.
But it was a challenging job to get all those commercials in
And that's
there.
what made the business run.
You bet it is.
Yeah.
You bet.
Well, let's mention a couple of the other managers who have been in your KRS experience. I'm going to bring up the name Walt Teach. He was a contemporary of yours, Hank.
Yes, Walt was the original sales manager at the station.
So he was in the original group.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when Morg Sexton left to go out to Cedar Rapids, Walt took over as general manager. And he served, I think, until about 1951.
At which time he went to KOEL in Old Line.
Yes, yes. And Bernard Jacobson, the son of the original owner, took over as manager.
Mm-hmm. And so Walt went on then to carve out quite a niche in Northeast
Right.
Iowa at KOEL.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Where did Sexton go in Cedar Rapids? Do you remember?
I'm trying to remember, and I think he helped start what is now KCRG.
Okay,
I believe that is it.
that would have been 47.
Right around 47 or
Yeah.
48. in
Okay,
that
so he
year.
was involved in that.
Yes.
There's such an interesting fabric of personalities. Sexton comes from WHO to manage KROS, and then goes to Cedar Rapids and is involved with KCRG. Teach goes to Oline and manages the stations there. It's an interesting family.
Another personality that kind of cuts across those is the executive director of the old Iowa Tall Corn Network,
Okay.
C. Ross Martin.
Oh, yes.
And Ross Martin, of course, worked with a number of small stations, and KROS was one of the founding members of that.
You were a
that
found.
organization.
Well, why don't we talk just a little bit about that? What was sort of the rationale behind that, as you recall it, Hank?
Primarily a sales organization, although programming was involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a means of trying to put several small stations in an area where they would receive advertising that had only gone to the biggies before then.
WHO and
Right.
WMT,
Yes.
and primarily.
Yes.
So it was to buck the big regional stations in sales.
Yes, and I think that was basically it. The fact that one buyer could buy several different markets
Right.
with one purchase.
Mm-hmm. And that evolved later into statewide sports broadcast then.
Yes.
Have you been tied into a sports network, Don?
Yes, we certainly have. We're now part of the Radio Iowa group, but Gene Clausen, who I'm sure you probably know,
Yeah.
Graham, from the KXIC, did the
Right.
play-by-play over the... And the Iowa Radio Network was a hardwired network. It had direct connections to all stations. They exchanged news, actualities, and so on as well, and along with the sales, which
Right.
of course was an important part of it too.
Well, you mentioned news. Again, a very solid. Sexton made that commitment from the very beginning, I take it. And that comes out of the H.R. Gross, Jack Shelley incubation that took place over at WHO.
And no question, and probably the most legendary news figure in the station was Lee White,
Lee White.
who won several national awards for the station's news coverage during his tenure as news director, before he went on to work at the Clinton Herald as well here in town in the newspaper business. But they did some unusual things in the 52 flood, I believe it was. They did some reports from the air, which was one of the first stations in the country to do live broadcast from the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Hank, as a matter of fact, was involved with doing some of those flood coverages in 1952 and 1965, I believe, were the big floods.
Well, the flood of '65 actually was the real big one. And at that time, the station went on the air for 24 hours a day. And I would say for about a 3-week period of time, we devoted ourselves to passing along information about the flood. We covered it from boats on the Mississippi. We covered it from jeeps traveling the dike area. There were 2 of us who flew at the time, and we covered it from the air. I remember one particular case. I did my first broadcast at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I did my last broadcast at 2 o'clock the next morning.
Well, that's a pretty good day.
It was a pretty good day, and that's the kind of effort really that we put into it.
The station just totally committed itself to covering that flood disaster.
Yeah, we did nothing else during that period of time. Salesmen quit selling. We did whatever had to be done to make sure that the city had the information concerning where the waters of the Mississippi were.
And that was the period, that was the great flood then that actually sort of precipitated the dike system that we have now. So
Right.
downtown Clinton was just about totally inundated in that flood.
Well, actually, no. We built a dike, a temporary dike,
Okay,
and we protected most of the downtown area.
okay.
But it was the effort to keep that dike going and to keep the downtown area from being
So
flooded.
I guess I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Dubuque. Dubuque, it just went all the way to the bluff for all
Yeah.
practical purposes.
Well, here we had areas in the Lyons area that were underwater, and the entire riverfront area was.
Hmm.
The downtown area basically was protected.
But that was with a temporary.
That was a temporary dike. And I think it was very interesting. We would put out a call that, there was a problem in one section, and within 10 minutes, there would be 40 or 50 people there who were filling sandbags and piling them in the place where they had to be.
Yeah, interesting.
I've always thought it was one of the greatest examples of cooperation that this city has seen.
Hmm. And the hometown radio station was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, very definitely.
Yeah, right. Was there any other station here at that time, Don, or were you?
The other station in the market, KCLN and they were KCLN then, AM and FM was also in the market. Hank mentioned the downtown area. To give you an idea, the flood wall that they had built, the temporary wall, was about 8 or 9 feet high, and I was just a little boy at this time. I remember being down there and crawling to the top of this dike and looking out, and there was the river.
Mm.
So if that dike would have went,
Yeah.
downtown would have been inundated and
Right.
then some.
So that's a remarkable story. My mental image recollection of that is Dubuque, which was really just swamped by. You had a little more time to get ready for it, but it took a superhuman effort, didn't it?
Yeah, from the National Guard, the students, everybody. Margaret, maybe you do.
I remember the whole staff, everybody that was left on the ground was down there in their boots and filling sandbags.
Yeah, right. Well, while you were downtown, Margaret, all of a sudden you looked out and the tower was laying out in the street. I get you had your transmitting tower on the top of the Jacobson building. What happened there?
Well, we had a real bad windstorm, ice storm, and all combined, and all of a sudden it was on the ground. That's all.
It tipped over the transmitting tower.
How many feet was it? I have no idea anymore. It was a humongous tower.
About 200 feet.
And it was laying on the street, and it was a sight to behold.
Mm-hmm.
Walt Teach was the manager at that time, and he shared a story with me about how it came down across 5th Avenue South, which is the downtown main drag, and never touched a soul, he said. And laid out there across the brick street, and that's when we constructed the tower out here in 1947, which our studios are currently located in.
Uh-huh. So were you able to get back on the air during that tower collapse?
Yes, they did. Lee White shares a story of having to go out and read the news from the Chicago Tribune off the seat of the toilet in the transmitter building.
Well, Lee would probably embellish that a little
Yes,
bit,
he did.
my recollection of him. But,
We changed the call letters from KROS to KRAP, I think it was.
there's a little radio humor
Sounds
there.
like Lee White.
The call sign KROS originally stood for Keep Right On Smiling.
Oh, really?
And it still stands for that.
It still stands for that. Well, so the ice storm knocked your tower over, and then you moved out of the Jacobson building as a station to another location, and
Right.
where was that?
They remodeled the studios on North 2nd Street and moved from the Jacobson building, I think it was in 1974, and into a more modern facility.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about in 1984, about 10 years later, that a fire in a building at the end of the block came down the block and burned our studios, and we were suddenly off the air. The Zion Lutheran Church service was on the air as the flames were making their way down the block, but it took us off the air, and I think that's the longest interruption we've had in service, but it took us about, what,
I think we said 56 hours.
To-
We went off the air at 11:30 on Sunday morning, and we were back on the air in temporary studios Tuesday afternoon around 4 or 4:30.
And the entire station studios burned at
all
that.
the studios were, everything was lost. WMT loaned us equipment, WHBF, WCCI in Savannah, stations from everywhere called and offered help. And we put together in a studio that had been vacated by the other radio station in town,
I see.
and set up and got back on the air as quickly as possible. When we went on the air, with a 1-hour special about the fire.
Still doing news.
Yeah, that was the first thing we did when we got back on the air, was
Yeah.
came on with a 1-hour special about the fire, which included interviews with all the people that were involved and so on.
Well, let me take you just, we've sort of gone past you started listening to KROS as a child. You remember being down at the dike when, and the great flood, and so when did you get on with the station, Don?
1972, and to be quite honest, earlier than that, I can remember listening to Hank Dihlman under the blankets at night when I was supposed to be in bed listening to the end of the ball game.
Well, if
on a
anybody, it
6
should have been him.
transistor. And I started in 1972, and of course that's the time when radio was changing.
Yeah.
In the early days, radio was the primary source of news and information,
Yeah.
but its role was changing, and so was the music in particular changing.
Yeah.
When I first started, we didn't play I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. We played the Ray Conniff version of I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra and a few others like that. And music modernized, and the style of broadcasting has changed, but a lot of the things that still worked for this station in its original days are continuing to work for today. Margaret's Homespun Lane is still on.
Still on.
5 in the afternoons, Monday through Fridays on KROS.
And then so you were, did you come on the station as an announcer
I was
then?
a sign-off announcer for the first job, and then became a music director and a program director, and finally general manager in 1987
Okay.
is when I took
Okay.
over as general manager.
You've had a program on your station for the entire 57 years, is that what it is?
Well, we have several. The 7:30 news, I know, is aired every day.
And that's a 15-minute
Yes,
newscast.
15-minute newscast.
I love 15-minute
We
newscasts.
have
I did a
15
lot of
minutes
them.
at 7:30, 8:30, 12:30, and 5:30.
Yeah.
And we used to have one at 10:30 at night as well. And that's been a tradition of the station. Some days it gets pretty tough on the news department to fill 10, 15 minutes with quality information.
Yeah.
There are other times when it seems like you have more than you can put in there.
Right. What about the church broadcast? You say where the church was on when the fire hit.
Zion Lutheran Church has been on continuously since, I think it was 2 years after we went on the air, so
Okay.
it's been about 55 years now. It's aired at 10:30 in the morning on Sundays every week.
Okay. You've been through a couple of several ownership changes, but there's only been one period of about 3 years that the station was not locally owned. Kind of trace that for us a little bit, you and Hank.
Public service broadcasters, or PSB they call themselves, out of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, acquired the license in 1974, and they held the license for about 3 years before selling it back to a local group, which Hank was affiliated with. And they owned the station then until 1978, when the AM and FM stations were jointly sold to Marcom, a group out of Georgia, headed by Donald Alt and Kirby Confer. That group then in turn sold the AM station back to some of us that were working for the station at that time, so basically we've been employee or past employee owned ever since.
So that your motivation there, Hank, was to keep a local ownership hand in this business.
Very definitely, that was part of it. And there's a word called loyalty that enters in. We had people who had been with us for many years, who had done a terrific job. Some of the older ones had felt a little badly when the station was sold originally. And I guess we decided at that time that we were going to give the present employees an opportunity to buy into it and to keep local ownership. We've always felt that was very important, and in this day and age, obviously, it's very unusual.
Yes, certainly is.
But we felt that way at the time, and although I have sold my interest in this station, I've always felt that way, still do.
Yeah. Well, then the FM then was split up. The FM went to the new ownership,
Right.
and then the AM was purchased by
The
employees. Now, what is your power, Don?
1,000 watts,
1,000 watt,
full-time,
full-time,
non-directional.
non-directional.
Operate 5:30 to midnight, although we are licensed unlimited. We could go 24 hours a day.
What do you? How do you define your market?
We basically say we are now a River City station, which is Clinton, Fulton, Comanche. Now, originally, of course, when we went on the air in the 40s, there were no other stations like in Savannah and some of the smaller communities. So
Right.
we had a much more regional basis to our approach to news and information programming. Now we pretty much concentrate on our local area.
Okay.
And that's where our niche is.
Yeah.
You know, they can listen to music from Chicago or the Quad Cities or Cedar Rapids, but if they want to hear the local news, the school lunch menus, the lost and found department, the buy-seller trade show, they have to listen to KROS.
or the Margaret Show,
Right, Homespun Lake.
or the play-by-play football.
Hank and the Clinton High football, that's correct.
Now, in this new environment with Connoisseur owning 300 stations and J-Core that many, is this niche going to hold for a station like this? Now, this is 1998. We're heading into the new millennium, and some of these AMs have had a pretty rocky time.
Well, I'll tell you, broadcasting I'm sure has never been easy, as Hank I'm sure would attest to, but we have a commitment. Our ownership is all local native, Clinton-born people, including several members of the current staff. We're thinking of possibly expanding that to involve more of the staff in the ownership, and if it can be done, we're going to continue doing it, and until it can't be done.
Yeah.
That's kind of our commitment at this time, to continue on that tradition.
And obviously, it's your hope that you will be able to define this niche for this station.
Well, and we're hoping that that niche will continue to be the source of enough revenue from our supporting businesses to make it a viable business for the future,
Right.
and for the people that come after me.
Mhm.
Because I'm getting to the point now where I'm starting to think even of the people that are going to be coming after me,
Yeah.
as Hank and Margaret have done.
Hmm. One of the things that you've done is create a KROS Hall of Fame, which is kind of a nice thing.
In 1991 was the 50th anniversary of the sign-on of the station. I have obviously a great deal of admiration for the people that worked here, and it was our feeling that the KROS of today is the direct result of the efforts of the people that have worked here in the past.
Mhm.
So, as a way to honor that, we established a Hall of Fame with 10 charter members, and we induct a new member each and every year, and it's always a thrill to see we also have an annual station reunion where anybody
Mhm.
who's a past employee is welcome to come back. We have a little party and have a ceremony in which we induct the new member of the Hall of Fame.
Great tradition.
It's certainly turned out that way.
Yeah.
We're very pleased with it.
Right. Well, you've had some names. We've mentioned Walt Teach went on to KOEL. You've also had some on-air people who have advanced their careers on other stations. Who are some of those folks? And
Yes. There have been so many people.
well,
over
there's
the
a guy
course
named
of
Gary
years,
Sarnoff
and
that I know personally.
Gary Sarnoff, of course, went on up to Waterloo after he left here. We had a fella early on named Harry Zimmerman who went on to Minneapolis and St. Paul radio. Blake Lanham went on to big league things. Bob Irwin, one of the original members, went on to Milwaukee. Oh, I scratched the surface.
Right. Bob Bodden owned some stations in Wisconsin and was executive director of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. Ron Elke, the current anchor at WHBF-TV in Rock Island, was one of our news members. Trying to think of some of the others.
Jim Doyne,
Jim Doyne at WMT was part of our staff. Larry Higley, who's been through a number of stations in Iowa, has also been a part of our staff. Dave Sylvester,
Yeah.
farm director of the station, that went on to other stations and did very well in the agricultural community. And you know, I think you learn a little bit from each person that passes through your business,
Right. Yeah.
your station over the years.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've been blessed with not having a whole lot of new blood over the last 10 years, but
And that's a real blessing, all right, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's been rare. You think of broadcasters, you think of people that would move into town, spend a year or two, get some experience, and move out. But on our staff currently, I think I have almost every member of the leading departments has been with the station at least 15 years.
That's some real unusual stability too. Been a family, Margaret.
It has, and you know, that's one thing I would like to say is thank you to all those who are still working for including this old lady in all the activities, because it's really nice.
Yeah.
We've had so many friendships evolve from your radio job.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I was also the KROS tour guide, and I think it was 10 trips to Hawaii. Met so many wonderful people, and we still have those aloha reunions are great.
Yeah.
All the way through. I think when he says family, he means family.
Right.
Well, I think that's one of the exciting things about being in commercial radio is the promotions and the things that have been done over the years. And we like to think we've had some rather creative ideas at times over the years here at KROS. And that's one of the great things about radio is its ability to move goods and services as far as a commercial entity. And I think that's an important part of the story.
It is an important part, but fundamentally it's what it does in a community, isn't it?
certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Some days you wonder whether the effort's worthwhile, but in the long run, I'm sure it is.
Well, I think again, I was really struck by, again, I wasn't quite as close to the flood story in Clinton, but you've sort of given me a new angle on that story, that the building of that flood wall and saving the downtown. It's an incredible accomplishment.
Well, as I said, I've always felt it was one of the highlights of my stay in the city of Clinton. A tremendous amount of enthusiasm and cooperation by everybody.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, nice to have you reflect on this family tree.
There's nothing we'd rather talk about.
If you ever attend one of our reunions, you'll find that out.
Well, maybe we'll do that.
We'll have to do that. Well, I'm sending an invitation.
One final note here,
Yeah.
Brad. When I retired, somebody said, would you do it over again if you had the opportunity?
Mhm.
And I said then, and I've said many times since then, hey, you're doggone right I would. And I'd have just as much fun the second time around.
With that 5,000th and maybe 141st football game, huh? Hank, thank you.
Thank you.
Don
Thanks, man.
and Margaret.
Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure to talk with you about KROS. To identify some photographs now that are associated with the interview that we've just done, and Don Schneider is with me to help me with the identifications. Don, this is this was referenced in the interview. This was the original studio for KROS, right?
Yes, it certainly was. Many of the people that worked at the station over the years always tell the story of climbing the two flights of stairs to get to the second story of the Jacobson building and walking through the double doors into this lobby with KROS written on the floor in linoleum and the lightning bolts going out to the corners of the room and the teletype in the middle of it. Then you see straight in the back and behind the mahogany wood and glass was the actual control room at the station.
Why don't you go ahead and push in there? That's an interesting detail. So that's the teletype, and when people came in, they'd come in and watch the news coming in.
People would come in at all hours of the day, I understand, to watch the news type out.
And then the studios were on beyond there.
Right, and in that glassed-in studio, you'd be looking straight out toward the lobby when you were at the council. To the left was Studio B, which had bleachers and a boom mic and grand piano for live in-studio programs, and the production studio and news studio were off to your right side.
So this was where the station went on the air then. This was a pretty nice, that was a very nice looking office suite.
Many people call it a showplace of 1940s radio who had been there and seen it, and it was originally very well done when the station went on the air originally in 41.
In 1941, okay. What we're looking at now, Don, is the conventional ribbon cutting shot when the station went on the air in 1941.
10 a.m., September 28, 1941, the station went on the air. The mayor cutting the ribbon here, and they had this high school marching band played, and they had dignitaries from all over that were participating in the original broadcast when the station first went on the air, bringing radio service to Clinton, Iowa for the first time.
Clinton has its own radio station. Big deal.
That was a big deal then.
And it was done with class.
And a lot of people talk about the original tests and the excitement that was leading up to the big day, and then to think that they were actually on the air was really something magical to them.
And before that, it would have been listening to WMT, WHO, WGN, maybe WOC.
If you could get them on your crystal set.
Right. But this is the next wave of radio.
Right.
And this had to be one of the last stations to go on the air before the war then.
More than likely, it went on in September, and of course, Pearl Harbor was in December of that same year.
Yeah,
so.
right. Okay. This next image then, Don, is the very early ownership and management of KROS.
That's correct. Station was originally put on the air by Congressman William Jacobson from Clinton.
And he is the second from the right hand, looking at it from the right.
Right. And next to him on the far right-hand side is Morgan Sexton, the station's first general manager, who was created with laying down the precepts by which the station still operates to this day.
And he came over here from WHO
From WHO in Des Moines to Clinton. And a very educating type of manager, a person who is very highly respected by all that ever worked with him.
Okay, let's stop there. But this is a single then of Mr. Sexton, who, as you say, laid the philosophical basis as well as the business basis of this local station.
That's correct, and one of the things that he established was the 10 goals and objectives for community growth and development, which we continue to release each year on the anniversary of the station sign-off.
And that means local community service.
Right, the things that we think are the 10 most important things for community growth and development here in the River Cities.
So there's a pioneer broadcaster for sure.
Yeah.
I think let's do it. Okay, the image that we're looking at now is a man on the street scene. Man on the Street was a pretty traditional program format for a lot of stations, and apparently you had a very successful one here, Don.
Well, the Man on the Street was one of the earliest of the programs aired on KROS and continued for a number of years, I think actually into the 1960s here.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it didn't draw as big a crowd as you see here, but yes, this was in the early days of radio when Jack was able to draw a big crowd in front of the Van Allen department store, which is still a fixture in downtown Clinton.
And Jack was?
Jack Hubbard. He was one of our Hall of Fame broadcasters and the original program director of the station. And the Man on the Street, as we mentioned, we've had reports from other guys that did the Man on the Street show that talked about being out in the street on a wintry, blizzardy night and nobody to talk to, and having another member of the station come along and do an assumed voice and interview him as the largest hog producer in the county to fill the show. But
you're talking about tricks of the trade here now, aren't you?
Right. But the Man on the Street, and Jack Hubbard in particular, was considered a master at doing that type of program.
One of the really good artists at that.
Right.
Great. Okay, this is a KROS program innovation, Don.
This program kind of was like the satellite school systems of today. In the early days, this was the Whiteside County School Music Program, and the teacher at that time would do a music lesson with one of the many schools that she was serving in Whiteside County. Then the students at the other schools would tune in the radio and follow along the lesson kind of by a remote classroom through the radio.
Mm-hmm. That must have been, was that Illinois?
Yes, it is. Whiteside County is just across the river from us in Illinois.
Okay, and so that, and the program was on KROS?
Yes, it was. And, that along with several other amateur musician type programs in the old days, but this one was recognized by the State Education Association as being an innovative teaching process in those days.
So the station was playing sort of the role of educational radio here.
Right, in this particular instance.
All right, on this photograph, Don, we're looking at, we've talked in the interview about a number of KROS alums who have gone on to distinguished careers, and who's the man on the right doing the interview?
The man on the right doing the interview is Bob Bodden. This would have probably been in about 1949 to 1950. Bob went on to put several stations on the air in Wisconsin and was the executive director of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association and has been inducted in the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame. I'm not sure exactly who Bob was interviewing in this particular picture, but as most small radio stations, interview type public affairs programming has always been a big part of the service we offer to the community.
And so this is
Bob Bodden.
Bob Bakken. In this frame, we're looking at the man who makes the place run, the engineers who don't get as much credit as they should sometimes, and this is KROS' first engineer, right?
And their first transmitter, and I think you're indeed correct in that quite often engineers maybe don't get as much credit as they deserve. We have two engineers we've inducted into our Hall of Fame, as a matter of fact, over the years because of the important role that they do play in keeping the station on the air. And of course, in the early days, in the 40s, announcers, all they did was announce.
Yeah.
They didn't operate the equipment. That was the job of the engineer.
And this is, we're singling out now two Andrews. And,
Right. This is Gil Andrews, the original chief engineer of the station.
Okay. The perspective here, Don, is this is the original tower which was on the top of the Jacobson building in downtown Clinton.
Which was kind of surprising that they'd allow a tower that height to be constructed in the middle of the downtown business district, but yes, it was on top of the Jacobson building. I believe it was 184 feet was the height of the tower, and this is as you're looking up Fifth Avenue South at that tower.
Okay. Now, the FAA didn't have their hands in it quite that much in those days.
Matter of fact, the FAA didn't exist.
That's the reason.
It was the Civil Aeronautics Board, I believe, at that time. So.
Well, as things go, and as we talked about in the interview, the winds blow and the ice forms, and that's what happens.
In 1947, I believe it was April of that year, an ice storm and associated wind caused the tower to fall off the top of the Jacobson building. Manager at the time was Walt Teach, who later became manager at KOEL and O-Line, and he said that the greatest thing about it was it went right across Fifth Avenue South, the busiest business district in the town, and never touched a soul.
But the chief engineer must have gone crazy.
It was a nightmare. They ended up stringing a temporary wire antenna between buildings and reducing power, and somehow managed to stay on the air, eventually having to go to the transmitter site and read the newspaper from the toilet seat as they were sitting on the toilet seat to put the news on the air.
And Lee White christened that the KRAP
Right.
newsroom.
KRAP newsroom.
Right. I can just see him doing that. He was an interesting colleague of mine.
Lee was one of a kind. They broke the mold when they made Lee White.
It's nice to have people like that, isn't it? Well, there's some history of your station that you could have done without, but you get it the way it comes, don't
And
you?
it resulted in the tower being built out here on 13th Avenue North at our current location in 1947. And then in 1988, we constructed our current studio building on the site of that tower.
Then that's
which is
this is the technical sequel to that previous story then, Don. This is when the tower moved out to your present broadcasting location.
And they did a special promotion associated with that because, for one thing, were allowed to double the site height of the tower at that time, which is the 400-foot tower, which we have out back of us now, and that allowed us to extend the limits of our service a bit. And when it was originally constructed, there was nothing but a farm field out here, gravel roads around us, and now we have a medical clinic, a retirement home, and residential housing all the way around the outside of our tower.
So this is on 13th Avenue out on the north side of Clinton.
Just about smack dab in the middle of Clinton.
Okay, as it exists today.
Right.
And the date on this then would be?
Then 47.
47.
1947.
So when you went from the Jacobson building to the other studio location, you were using this tower?
This tower site, and the tower building is still out here, the transmitter building.
Okay.
That this new studio building is adjacent to.
Okay. This is an image which demonstrates what we talked about on the church service, which has been a long-standing program on KROS.
We have several church services programs that have been on continuously at the same time for over 35 to 40 years. This is the granddaddy, so to speak, on KROS, the Zion Lutheran Radio Hour, which went on the air, I believe it was 57 years ago now, and has run continuously since then at 10:30 on Sunday mornings.
And that is a picture from the 10th anniversary, so it would have
Right.
been about 51.
And I'm sure the church has been remodeled several times since then, as a matter of fact. But of course, religious broadcasting has played a big part of service to our community and communities throughout the state.
And you continue to do that.
Right.
Interesting. Visual documentation of the kind of community involvement that the station had. What's going on here, Don?
Well, this is one of the KROS cooking schools, programs from the Homemaker from the early days of a program called Party Line when we first went on the air, to Homespun Lane, programs designed for the homemaker, recipe swapping, household hints, that type of thing. Been a regular feature of KROS, and in the 60s, they used to do cooking schools, which would involve a whole week of people coming in, packing Washington Middle School auditorium to see demonstrations of the latest cooking techniques and appliances. And then at the end of the week, they'd give away all the appliances on stage to the folks that had attended the show during the week.
So we're looking now at the person who's doing the presentation, and that's going out on, being broadcast on KROS.
Right, and then the show, of course, is performed live in front of the audience.
And why don't you tilt back up to the audience then, Jason? And, so this is radio really getting into people's lives, isn't it?
Well, that's what community radio is all about, hometown radio
Yeah.
service, getting out and being a part of your community.
Yeah, yeah. Good demo. Too familiar with, but obviously it's a World War II thing about. With apologies to what we know about cigarettes today, we were encouraging our servicemen to smoke.
Yes, they certainly were in those days, and of course, World War II was one of the times that radio really asserted itself as a national news entity and providing
Certainly did.
information to the folks at home. And This is a way for the folks at home to support their serviceman by participating in this program. You could send free cigarettes to your soldier, sailor, or Marine, as it says in the poster.
And there apparently was some sort of a national program on it that was probably carried on KROS.
More than likely, probably a mutual program. We were a mutual affiliate originally and still are to this day.
And tune in at 5 o'clock
And find out how it's done.
and find out how to do it.
Careful with your hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm shaking that way. Yeah,
That's tough when it's tall. There we go.
that's fine.
All right.
Well, this is a collage, and this is some of Margaret's work.
Yes, Margaret Gideonsen put this together for our 50th anniversary. Features a lot of the personalities that worked on the station over the years and the people that made it go. Up here in the extreme left-hand corner, as you look into your TV screen,
Come up over here.
We
Why
have-
don't you let him get set up there?
these are some pictures of Jim Doyne, who currently is at WMT in Cedar Rapids doing a Sunday big band show. When he was a little boy, he started doing commercials on the Van Allen Kitty Quiz. You see him over here in this
Not
far
quite over
corner.
There we go. Now, let's
And-
start there.
Jim worked here for about 16 years on a full-time basis and part-time basis before moving to Cedar Rapids. And if you move to the right a little bit, that's
Later
Jim a little
version.
later, and then that's Jim of kind of today, although that's probably about 10 years old, I suppose.
Right. Well, that's an
photograph
interesting
is by now.
personality history, isn't it? Well, let's come down here, and here's my friend Lee White.
Lee White, leader of the news department, was a longtime news director at the station, and the station won several national awards for news coverage and inventiveness in the way they covered news.
He really knew the community.
Yes, he did, and was very much a teacher as well. Left quite a legacy behind him.
Of staff members.
Right.
Mhm.
Just to the right is Dave Sylvester, who was later known as the Dean of Iowa Farm Broadcasters until he recently passed away. He spent time at, I believe, KWMT and KOEL and Olwine. He's got his start, and in this picture he's Dave the Sanitary Milkman for the Saturday morning kitty quiz that was sponsored by Van Allen Department Store.
Now let's look at two of the guests that we interviewed, Margaret and Hank. Let's start with Margaret.
That's Margaret Gideonsen from about 1942. She was a longtime hostess, should I say, of the Homespun Lane Ladies Program. And then down here is Hank Dihlman, the sports director and general manager of the station for many years as well.
And a younger version of Hank and a younger version of Margaret.
That's correct.
Why don't you just pull back and get the wide shot again, then? That's it. And same time, same station,
KROS, keep right on smiling.
KROS. Keep right on smiling. Quite a tradition.